of leadership, how can you maintain its momentum? Have you ever felt that you've got your toe on the first rung, or you're just starting off and you don't want to lose it? This thing called leadership, how can you maintain its momentum? Well, first of all, destroy the camouflage and the comfort of mediocrity. My friends, we are heading towards the biggest trade war in the history of the human race. There will not be one human being on the face of the earth that will be able to avoid it. And the next 2 nights, I'm going to show you how to become entrepreneurs, how to get out of debt, how to handle your families without losing them, how to be able to set goals and hit them on target from a biblical perspective. How can you maintain this thing called leadership? Always think, plan, and work for the large impact and the long-term results. How can you maintain its momentum? Courageously oppose wrong. We must never stoop to conquer. In nearly 40 years of business, I've never had one person hold a fist up to me and say, "You gave us a bad deal." Only despots justify questionable means to reach their end. Or this thing called leadership, how can you maintain its momentum? Resist the comments in the direction of the crowd. The Bible says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. And remember that ruthless logic is a sign of a limited mind. The third question, how can I guarantee it's coming? I want so much to make a mark for God in my life. I want to go into the kingdom singing gloriously. When I finally expire, whatever I've done in my lifetime, and that's what I've transferred my life for, and I want to have something that will last and be the only measure of value, which is permanence. Leave a heritage for the next generation. How can I guarantee it's coming? Well, first of all, always be alert to the gap in history. As I travel around the world today, I see crisis in many countries around the world, and our corporations go in where there is crisis. Why? Because the Asiatic word for crisis is a double meaning word. It is danger and opportunity. Oh yes, I sought for a man among them who would stand in the gap and build me a wall, that I might not destroy the land, but I found none. My friends, the gap is the place of danger. The gap is the place where you can hear the sobs of broken hearts. The gap is a place for those who care. How can you guarantee this thing called leadership coming? Move deliberately towards a pivotal point. In other words, make sure that you are a pivotal point to whatever happens. And be grand in its implementation. I think if Adolf Hitler was going to be a Third Reich that would last 1,000 years. You can't do it in 10 minutes. You can't do it in this world of instant coffee. I've been on mine for 38 years, nearly 39 years. It'll be another 6 years before I start to push the switch to change the world. And under the providence of God, it will last for 400 years. Be grand in its implementation. Leave a legacy. Leave something that's going to last 100 years after you've gone. This thing called leadership, how can I guarantee it's coming? The great last English bulldog was Sir Winston Churchill. He was in a war in Africa as an early 20-year-old. He wrote a letter back to his mother. I've seen a copy of the letter. He said, "Dear mother, the platoon that I was in was caught in an ambush today by the enemy. But rather than flee, I turned my pony around and I rode it straight into the face of the enemy. I withdrew my revolver. I dispatched 2 of the enemy immediately, spun my pony around, and dispatched another 2. I was as cool then as I am now writing this letter to you. Nary a bullet touched my pony, my tunic, or my person. I believe I was preserved for higher things. Oh, there are people here that shouldn't be here. You have been preserved for higher things. My friends, look for signals and ignore the cost. I think of my own life, diphtheria, I should have gone. But look for signals and ignore the cost. When that young curly-headed man with that loud tie said, I want you to get up out of your seat and give your life to Christ, he will fill the vacuum of your heart. On May the 25th, 1959, that was a signal. Look for signals, ignore the cost. At one time with some other people, I took pornography against women to the Supreme Court, and for the first time for 600 years had it banned by the Supreme Court. And as I finished that going on for 43 years of age, I sat out under a huge eucalypt tree in our backyard. There was no wind blowing. The tree had been there for about 100 years. And I thought, well, I looked up and saw this huge branch hanging over. It must have weighed 2.5 tons, 3 tons. I thought, well, God is sovereign. If that's all I have to do, if maybe I have made up the rest of this stuff, then God is sovereign. That bough could fall and I'd be in glory in an instant. My insurance was paid up. Everything was right. But there was no wind. It was a beautiful summer day. And I walked away. Down it came. It crushed the seat that I was sitting in. It crushed the concrete under the seat that I was sitting in. It pushed an iron fence 2 feet in the hard-packed earth, and I reset my priorities. Look for signals and ignore the cost. At the time I'd buy a 40-foot wall, and Rabina pleaded with me to get away. I laughed at her, but finally I walked away and the wall fell down. Look for signals and ignore the cost. We were in a revolution. We could hear the rat-tat-tat machine guns from the hotel room. We couldn't get out of the country, but we escaped. Look for signals and ignore the cost. Another time, the airplane engines were on fire and I landed safely. Look for signals and ignore the cost. My mother told me she tried to abort me 4 times. She didn't want me. I said, Mom, I still won't go. Look for signals and ignore the cost. What is this mountain you want? Oh, Paul the Apostle said, I press forward towards the goal, the mark of my high calling, forgetting those things behind. The ancient Greek talks about a discriminant forgetfulness of the past, forgetting the hurts, the disappointments, and the brokenness, but remembering God's goodness. And the next verse says, all who are mature should have such a view of things. Maybe our maturity needs to be measured by this question: how's your goals program going? The second thing I notice about this man called Caleb, he had a good self-image. Oh, friends, we've got to clean up our act a little bit. Christians, we get around sloppy. We get around as if we're apologetic to the rest of the world. My Bible says that we're to be humble before God, but bold before men. Well, Caleb said, I'm as strong as 85 as I was at 40. Or never give up, let up, or shut up until God takes you up. A good self-image. The third thing I noticed about Caleb, he had a positive mental attitude. He said, there are giants there, but we can handle them. There may be giants in your life. One person with God is a majority. You can beat them. I know what it's like. I've been there. I know the pain of failure. I remember the last time I failed. I stripped down to my underpants. I lay on the concrete floor and I said this prayer as I lay prostrate there on that damp cold floor. I said, Lord, I'm so low I could walk under a snake's belly with an umbrella up and not even scratch his navel. What has happened? That's low. But a positive mental attitude. How do you get it? by understanding what motivates a person. Motivation is deeply personal. No one can get into your mind and body and act it out for you. You can't catch it like a common cold. You'll need long-term goals. Why? Because long-term goals turn fantasy thinking into fantastic action. We've found that even people 60 and 70 years of age, if they set a long-term goal, it will reprogram their body clock. It's scientifically proven. Always have a futuristic look. What is this mountain you want? The final thing I notice about this man called Caleb, he had a dynamic faith. And faith turns weaknesses into strength because it turns dreams into reality, because it allows for a total perspective, because it means a dependence on God, because it is a commitment to the task, because it's a witness to the world. Faith waits and communes with God. How to continue faithful to the challenge, to continue true to the Word of God, to continue to the right direction and continue in the place of power. Faith inspires and demands action. After all said and done, there's a great deal more said than done. Action always follows dedicated faith. Action always follows premeditated faith. Action always follows sacrificial faith. Action always follows compassionate faith. Action always follows biblical faith. Faith honors God, and God recognizes His sovereignty. By accepting His plan, by accepting His power, by accepting His purpose, by accepting His permanence, by accepting His passion for the lost. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 1.5 teenagers in the world, 1.5 billion teenagers in the world that have never heard the claims of Christ. It'll be they that'll have their finger on the nuclear button. They'll be our terrorists. They'll be our business leaders. They'll be our politicians. And we've got to reach them. If you had to touch one of them every time I click my finger, without even talking to them, just touch them, it would take you 50 years. Yes, but we can handle it, because faith is the essential ingredient of leadership. And faith sees all problems as opportunity, and faith without works is dead, and dead men are not active. Faith is the key to the door of the supernatural. And when you confess your dream, like Joseph, you will create a crisis. Who do you think you are? Are we all to bow down before you? What would happen if a skinny kid from the other side of the tract who could not articulate words, and they wouldn't even let him hand out the hymn books because he wasn't intelligent enough, but I could clean the toilets? If I shared my dream, I would have been laughed at. Yes. There's a great book called Mover of Men and Mountains, written by R.J. Letourneau, one of the greatest Christian entrepreneurs this century. You ought to get it. It's an old book. He created the earth-moving equipment as we know it today. And he always said he was in partnership with God. But when he was going broke for the third time, he was in his house and his attorney came in to see him in the living room, and he said, "Mr. Letourneau," and he had a gruff voice. He said, "Yes." He said, "I have a representative group of the creditors in the parlor, and they have said if you go quietly, they will push no further and just quietly close you down." He said, "What'd you tell them?" He said, "I told them I would persuade you to do that, sir." He said, "You're fired." "Sir," he said, "I've worked for you for 14 years. Why am I fired?" He said, "Because you know nothing." The young man, he said, "All of my life," he said I was in partnership with God." "You ever heard of God going broke?" "You're fired." And he bounced back and made another 100 million to the glory of God and gave it to missions. You've got to ask the question, what am I doing here? I do not need another airplane flight. I want to be with my family. I want to be with my country, with my people. I want to feel the caress of my grandchildren who think I'm the fourth member of the Trinity. Some years ago, I'm on Dr. Robert Schuller's international board. I helped build the Crystal Cathedral. I'm one of the longest-serving international directors Dr. Schuller has. Many years ago, when he was interviewing me, he's done it many times on the Hour of Power, it was just after the Watergate scandal. He said, "Peter, say something to America. They're hurting." See, you, the American people, saved our nation during the 40s. The Japanese had already printed the currency to take over our country. The occupational currency was already stacked up. They did over 200 air raids on Australia. Not many people realize that. As a young boy, I used to carry 3 corks, one to bite on and one to put in each ear, ready for when the bombs came. We were scared. I sat on a curb and I watched the Australian convoy go past, and it was just some old pickup trucks, a few motorbikes, a few cheap weapons, and some broomsticks. The Japanese were going to invade Australia, and they could have walked in. But then the Americans came, and I sat on that same curb, and I saw this convoy go past. It took 2 hours to go past, and every GI asked me if I had an older sister. You saved our nation during the 40s. I wish you could know how much we love you for that. And young people and older people, get your grandparents and you kiss their feet. You'll never see the likes of them again. They were heroes, each one of them. The second thing was that you sent a young man called Billy Graham. This curly-headed young man with a loud tie that feared nothing but God himself and preached right from John 3:16, "For God so loved the world." It was the prayers and the finance of the American people that sent him. My oldest son said, "Dad, some nights I wake up and I wonder what would have happened. Where would we be today if Dr. Billy Graham hadn't come and you and Mother hadn't given your lives to Jesus Christ? And I can't go back to sleep." You, the American people, did that. I wish you could know how much we love you, and through that, and God's mercy, I've probably touched millions throughout the world. And the third thing was, as I was coming to grips with the scripture, I had a return medical missionary teach me Bible for 2.5 hours every Saturday morning on my knees for 15 years. And as I came to grips with my Bible and understood the Great Commission, I wanted to put it into practice, and I wanted to do something magnificent. I wanted, above all else, to see how much one person could give in their lifetime, and I wanted to change the world. But coming from my background, I didn't know anyone in that arena, and in the humble church that I went to, everyone else was probably lower class and just surviving themselves, and they had a poverty mentality, and that's a very comfortable way to live because you never have to perform, and if you don't perform, you don't earn. If you don't earn, you don't get, and if you don't get, you cannot give. And I wanted to do something different. Where could I turn? I turned to American self-help books. Frank Beckter, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. W. Clement Stone, The Success System That Never Fails. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. Again, the American people. I wish you could know how much we love you. I've been coming backwards and forwards here now for over 20 years. Bob Schuller said to me, "Peter, say something to the American people." And so while he was introducing me, I wrote this little poem on the back of the program. I do it very quickly. I can write a best-selling book in 17 hours or longhand without any reference material and no corrections. It's usually worth $5 million when I finish. Now, God's got a sense of humor. So I wrote on the back of the program these words, and I want to close with it. I trust you will come tomorrow night. I will never be back. This is your wake-up call. It would cost you at least $500 to come to a seminar if I did it commercially. Normally, if I spend this amount of time with a commercial corporation, I would get over $200,000. I'm here free of charge. God has sent me. There's no doubt in my mind about that. If I had any doubt, I wouldn't be here. But let me close with this. Oh, America, we love you. As we see your flag unfurl, for the promises of justice to a cruel and hostile world. You arrive at every conflict with a strong but gentle heart, always ready to help others, ever first to make the start. Your blessings to the world of enterprise and gifts produce a comradeship that's rare, that encourages and lifts. Oh, there are a few who want you down and never more to rise, but let them know in definite terms. Be ready for surprise. You are the greatest nation on the earth, a heritage of faith, a land of free and homes of brave who will never quake. So take on notice all the earth, in God we trust for sure, never take our gifts for granted or venture hostile to this shore. United in diversity, with cultures and with skin, your enterprise is always strong, with a firm will to win. God you trust to guide you as you continue on your way. Oh, America, we love you. What else is there to say? God bless America.